Always better to knead more than you think you need to. No pun intended there. Ciao and hello, my name is Sarah. I'm the founder of QB Cucina. In this video, we're going to be talking about how to make fresh egg pasta dough. Knowing how to make fresh egg pasta dough is both an art and a science because you really have to understand how the ingredients work together. And once you do understand that, more of the science aspect of it, then you can really start to play with the dough and understand how these things work together. It's also an art because you also have to feel the dough and know and understand, is this right? Or does it need more eggs or does it need more flour? And so we'll talk about both of those things today. The ingredients that we're using are very simple. We are just using some eggs. I have about 4 to 5 eggs out right now. We're going to measure them out to get a more precise measurement. And then I have some 00 flour designed for pasta. This is a finely milled soft wheat flour. And then I also have a little bit of semola flour, which is a hard wheat flour. Traditionally, we don't use semola flour in fresh egg pasta dough, but I do like to mix in just a little bit to add more structure to the dough. So we'll talk about that too. All right, let's get started and measure out our ingredients. So we're gonna start with 350 grams of 00 flour. And you'll see that I'm using a kitchen scale here for more accuracy. I highly recommend that you have one of these if you're going to be making a lot of pasta because it's far more accurate. Almost there. I always like to start as precise as possible to just set myself up for success. Even though I'm going to be feeling out the dough to see, if it needs more of something or less of something later on, it's always a good idea to have your ingredients measured out as close as possible. And then we're gonna also add 50 grams of the semola flour here, which is a twice milled semola flour. Again, this just adds a bit more structure to our dough, which I really like for shapes like garganelli or anything that needs, it's like maybe a tubular shape or needs more structure to it. If you don't have this, you could just use 400 grams of the 00 flour. And I'll just go ahead and mix up these flours together to get them incorporated. Moving on to our eggs. So we're gonna measure out 228 grams of eggs, which I know seems like a very kind of strange number, but that equals about 57% hydration for our dough. The important thing about eggs to know is that there are egg whites and there are egg yolks, and these two things do different things in your pasta dough. So egg whites are 90% water, which means they're going to add a lot of hydration to your dough, making it more pliable and easy to bend and move around. Egg yolks, on the other hand, are what give the pasta dough a really rich color, really rich taste, and that silky texture that we all want when we're making pasta. So I like to use a combination of some egg yolks and some whole eggs so that I'm getting the benefits of the egg yolks, but I'm not having to use 24 eggs to get to the right consistency. In other words, if you're making an all egg yolk dough, you're going to have to use a lot more eggs and you're gonna have a lot of egg whites left over. So I think the most practical option is to use about 3 whole eggs and 2 egg yolks. So we're gonna measure that out and see where we get. Let's start by tearing this out. Always tear out your bowl. We'll measure this out. Every egg weighs a little bit different. So for example, this egg weighs 61 grams, while the average egg I think is somewhere close to 55 grams, for example. So this is another reason why I like to really weigh out my eggs first to get the most accurate measurement. Okay, so 2 whole eggs, I got us to about 110. We'll do 1 more whole egg. And it's really important because we are only using 2 ingredients here to get the best eggs that you can find. And your eggs are fresh when the yolks are really plump like this. And the orange color is always a nice benefit too because that will add more color to your pasta dough. Okay, so we're going for a yolk here. Quickly separate that out. Okay. And I got to 213, so I'm gonna add in a little bit more egg white. Perfect. All right, so let's go on to mixing up your dough. So we're going to be using the well method here to mix our dough. You can do this in a KitchenAid mixer, but I think it's really important if this is your first time or you're a beginner pasta maker to do this by hand so that you can feel how the dough should feel. And this is the most traditional method of making pasta dough. So you're gonna dump your flour out onto a clean work surface, preferably a wooden surface, and you're going to make a well in the center using your hands, using your fingertips. And you want to make sure that it's wide enough to fit all the eggs in the center, but also that the walls are deep enough so that the eggs don't go spilling out. And then slowly we'll add in our eggs. And we'll take a fork and then slowly just start to mix the eggs together and incorporate the flour from the sides of the well into the eggs. Now, your job is to not let the eggs spill out, but if they do, don't worry, just take your bench scraper and scrape them up as quickly as possible. And the more you work the flour into the eggs, the thicker that the mixture in the center will become. There'll be less risk of it falling out and over. So don't be afraid to really mix the flour in there as you go. And you'll start to notice that the center looks almost like a custardy mixture. And it's gonna start to become harder and harder to mix that mixture as well. Okay, at this point, we can really start to incorporate the rest of our flour, and we can use our bench scraper to do that. So just sort of take the flour from the sides and scrape it over. You will notice that some parts of the dough are going to be really sticky at first, and other parts will be drier. That's totally normal. As we knead and mix the dough, it's going to smooth out and everything's going to become more incorporated together. So we have this giant shaggy mass at this point. We're going to use our hands to start kneading it. First, we're just going to fold the ingredients onto itself, and you can see how it's really sticking to my hands. Again, as we mix and knead it, we're gonna see if it needs more flour or more moisture, but for now, let's just work on getting it together. Really try to get all the bits of flour and dough that are coming off on your board into the dough, especially if it feels sticky. At this point, my dough is not as sticky. It's starting to really come together. And so we're gonna pause for a moment. We're gonna clean off our board. We're gonna wash our hands, and then we're going to really get into the kneading process. And the reason why we do that is because these little bits of dough that are kind of scraggly and left behind, they're gonna start to dry out. And if they get into our pasta dough, it can start to cause tears and other issues. So clean your work surface and then start again. So at this point is when you can really tell if your dough needs more flour or if it needs a little bit of water or more egg. Different factors in your environment might affect how humid or dry the dough gets. So if it's a really dry day, it could be drier even though the ingredients were the exact same as you did it before. Or if it's a really humid day, the dough could be really sticky and wet. So those things can impact your dough. So if it is sticky, just add a little bit more flour on. And if conversely, if it is too dry and not coming together, then just spritz it with a little bit of water or put a little water on your hands. And if it's really, really dry, like it's not coming together at all, you can just add in a little bit more egg and mix that with the parts that aren't coming together and then incorporate that in. Our dough feels really good, and we're going to just start kneading it at this point. So the kneading technique for this is fairly simple. It's pretty much a standard kneading technique in so much that you're going to lift it up, press it down with the palm of your hand, and then turn it 180 degrees, start over. Lift it up and press down. And at first, the dough will feel kind of gritty, and it might feel just a little uneven, not very homogeneous. But that's okay, because as we knead it, it's going to come together. And I'm really putting my whole body into this. So it does require a bit of strength. Typically takes about 10 to 15 minutes to knead the dough to get it to where you need it to be. When I teach pasta making classes, they typically tend to under knead the dough because they get really tired and they're not sure if it's done. So I always recommend going for at least 10 minutes, and then we'll talk about how to know when the dough is done as well. You can't really over knead it. You just might get really tired and the dough may start to dry out. So always better to knead more than you think you need to. No pun intended there. And the kneading is what builds the gluten structures that we need in the dough in order to stretch it and shape it and mold it into the shape that we want. And you can see that I am sort of pulling the dough up and then around and then pressing down with the palm of my hand as hard as I can. And I'm pressing out as well, so it's sort of down and out. Starting to sweat. The second dough today. My triceps, my little baby triceps, are not having it. I don't have to work out. I'm convinced that this is why Italian women live so long. It's because every day they're in the kitchen, getting their heart rate up, getting their grip strength up. I read recently that grip strength is like a really good indicator of how long you will live, or something that can help you live longer. So make pasta, you'll live longer. We're almost there, people. Maybe we should make a playlist that lasts the exact time you need to knead pasta dough. That way when the playlist is over, you know you're done. JK, you have to actually feel it, but it would give you something to do. Okay, so how do you know when you're done, apart from setting a timer? You can feel the dough. So feel and really look at the dough. So you know you're done when the dough is homogeneous in color, so you don't see any like little grits and bits of flour in there. It should be sort of a pale straw yellow. It should feel really smooth, like Play-Doh, so it shouldn't feel gritty or uneven in any sort of way. And when you stick your finger in, it should bounce back slightly, just like that. Perfect. And so that means that we've built enough gluten in the dough and that it will stretch out and do the things that we want to do when we're making our shapes. So at this point, we can cover it with some plastic wrap or a bowl and then let it rest for about 30 minutes and then we'll be ready to roll. Also, I have to normalize this. I never can get the perfectly smooth, like round dough ball. So if your bottom looks like this, do not worry, it's totally normal. And one of the things that you can do if you want to try to get more of like a perfect dough ball is almost like cheese, right? You kind of squeeze it together like this and then use the palm of your hand to just sort of press it together. As it rests, it's going to hydrate more and it will become a smooth dough ball, but don't worry about the ugly bottom, it's totally normal. And voila, we're done. We will link the full recipe below as well as other helpful guides and tips for making egg pasta dough. That's it. Say night-night, baby. Take a nap. Too much talking to my toddler. Okay.